One study said that advertising plays an even greater role than peer pressure in getting children to smoke.
And so they used a lot of different techniques to get young people to smoke, appealing to sexuality in certain ways, or the young life, or riding motorcycles and so forth.
The vast majority of young people are average and are ordinary, and they aren't Jimmy Dean. But they want to be Jimmy Dean. They want to think of themselves as having a little streak like Jimmy Dean. So that most of the advertisement shows people that are a little edgy and a little dangerous. They might have a tattoo. They might have their hair slicked back and be on a motorcycle. That may not be their life, or it might, but they certainly like to think that a little bit of them has this sort of adventuresomeness, contrarianness, nonconformity.
The industry doesn't really start targeting youth in a big way until after World War II. And the really dramatic push is even not until the 1970s and 80s. Reynolds starts doing this in order to compete with Marlboro, and that's when they introduced Joe Camel and the push to get what they call young starters or rookies or new smokers or beginners. They have about 10 different names for the new starters. And they use this measure of a glacier because they say that the cigarette market is like a glacier that's melting off at one end and needs to have new ice that's always put in the front end. And that new ice is what they call the replacement smokers.
Get them young when they first start, because every time they smoke a cigarette, that taste and that jolt is reinforced, so people become less and less likely to quit or switch brands the more and more they smoke.
I remember the Flintstones on TV and Barney, hawking Winston cigarettes, my family brand, on television. I thought it was cool when I was a kid, but I didn't know how dangerous smoking was as a child.
R.J. Reynolds realized that Philip Morris and Marlboro were really taking over the market. And one of the main reasons they were taking over the market was because Marlboro was the leading children's cigarette. And there's tremendous brand loyalty when you talk about tobacco. And since kids were shifting to starting their smoking with Marlboros, then they were staying with Marlboros. And so what Reynolds did was they came up with the Joe Camel cartoon character.
The three most heavily advertised brands, Camels, Marlboro, and Newport, are the same three brands that children smoke the most. So there's a clear association between the amount of money spent on advertising and the amount of smoking. The kids are choosing the most heavily advertised brands.
And so what you ended up with was a situation where Philip Morris and Reynolds were trying to leapfrog each other to see who could get the kids first. And it got younger and younger and younger and younger. And you ended up with research showing that very young children, preschoolers, were more likely to recognize Joe Camel than Mickey Mouse.
When R.J. Reynolds' executive wrote in 1975, we have to youthen the Camel brand. We have to go after the youth, for they represent tomorrow's cigarette business.
The advertising in recent years has moved from magazines and newspapers and from overt presence in TV ads, which went away in the early 70s. They've moved to point-of-sale advertising. So when you go in to buy your fudgicle after school, the chances are you're going to see a complete wall of tobacco products. And the packs are arranged in beautiful artistic ways. They really draw you in. You can get pina colada flavored cigarettes, and honey flavored cigarettes, and cocoa flavored cigarettes. And there is no purpose of these cigarettes except roping in young kids with sweet tooth to be able to begin smoking, get hooked on nicotine, and become consumers over the long term. The presence of tobacco in a young person's life, the presence of it there, everywhere you see, means that it's an ordinary part of life.
The tobacco industry, even today in the United States, spends about $13 billion on advertising and promotion, which is more than ever before. You don't see it a lot because there's not as much magazine advertising. It's mostly done through direct mail, and the tobacco industry realized it can spend $200, $300, or $400 per person advertising.
Even though it's expensive, but they're moving to direct mail because they can highly target the messages that they send to people, and because it's out of the public eye. They can do their marketing in ways where it's very, very hard for the public, for policymakers, for public health people to see what's going on. And they, like one of my students here, got on their list, and he gets a birthday card from them, and he gets a CD of his favorite music. And he gets like Marlboro sent him a little debit card with $20 on it that he could go spend anything he wanted on. And they sent him a little thing with a number on it and cards he could give his friends. And if they went onto this fun website and typed in this number, this guy got money for every one of his friends he recruited. And if they filled out a fun questionnaire about what music they like, where they hung out, kind of what they were interested in, then both of them would get some money. The bar is a key social institution for young adults, and the industry really, really, really wants to be there. And they've developed all kinds of promotions around that and products around it. But what's one of the most important things they're doing in the bars? They're going in there under the guise of verifying your age and asking to see your driver's license. They put it on a machine, wireless, scan it, and you're in their database.
The ultimate integration of the product is for it to become human itself. There was an Old Gold advertisement in the 1940s where a woman stood inside an Old Gold box and danced around in an early TV commercial. Again, she became the cigarette. So think of the psychology of this. Beautiful woman's legs in a box of cigarettes. I think they were targeting men. It's like, here's your box of candy to open. This is what's inside. It's kind of Freudian in that way. But also to the industry, if you become a cigarette and cigarettes become you, we own you. We own you thoroughly and completely. When cigarettes are shown as people, they become like ourselves, integral to ourselves. This is the psychology, I think, of a cigarette being a human being. They're an essential component of our life, so much so they are us. The ego boundaries between the person and the cigarette merge and collapse. There's no longer any differentiation, any doubt. It's an essential component of the individual. What happened in the tobacco industry is that they ended up creating the need throughout life. Cigarettes become essential when you wake up in the morning, when you socialize, when you're at work. They're essential to love and romance. They become an indispensable part of modern culture, such that if you didn't smoke, there was something wrong with you. They had the very best copywriters, the very best artists that money could buy, and they used that creative talent to amazing effect to create the need in the American public to smoke as an ordinary part of life, from the moment they woke up to when they went to sleep at night. And it became an ordinary and pervasive part of American life and culture. Many of the advertisements basically said to men, if you do this, you'll get lucky with women. And said to women, if you do this, you'll attract and keep a man.
These ads are not based on fact. They're based on emotion and psychology. And the whole idea of being accepted, cowboys gathered around a campfire. If you smoke, you can be in the campfire circle.
Almost any human need you can imagine, eating, breathing, enjoying athletics, playing games, love, was represented in tobacco advertising in a way that made tobacco products enhance it and make more real. Love was genuine when you both smoked and shared smoke rings together. There's a wonderful advertisement where the husband and wife, the betrothed, are blowing smoke rings, and they form into actual wedding rings in midair. And in other ads, they're encircled by wreaths of smoke, binding them together in their love. This is genuine genius, and the variations on the theme and the creativity in the artistic imagery and in the messaging was unlike really any other product. When you're selling cars, you can do it many creative ways, but tobacco products had no fundamental use. Therefore, they became necessary for all things and a part of all life experiences. Over the years, there have been an amazing number of slogans put forward by the tobacco industry to market their products. Not a cough in a carload.
Walk a mile for a camel.
They'll never get your wind.
Gentle on the T-zone.
Ivory tips to protect the lips.
More doctors smoke Camel.
Reach for a lucky instead of a sweet. Another device that they use is the name of the cigarette itself is very earnest. So you have True cigarettes, Vantage cigarettes, fact, as though it associated with facts. What are those facts? Well, it must somehow be better and more earnest and therefore trustworthy.
The tobacco industry has employed advertising tactics involving TV and radio and print and now social media really for generations. And what we have demonstrated in California is that those very same tactics can be used and turned against the industry, if you will, to counter tobacco industry messages that smoking is glamorous and attractive, and in turn to inform the public in California about the truth.
So what did the tobacco companies learn? They learned that anti-smoking advertising was more powerful than pro-smoking advertising.
You fight fire with fire, and the anti-smoking movement has had huge success by hiring top ad agencies, just like the tobacco companies did. And those messages have been so powerful.
We feel we've come a long way in terms of very creatively and effectively using media, using advertising to support community-based advocacy, to get important messages out about tobacco and how addictive it is, how deadly it is, and how there are resources to help people to quit and reasons why people should never start. One of our most powerful advertisements, for example, is what we refer to as voice box. It's the story of a woman named Debbie who was so addictive to nicotine, she smoked through her voice box. It's an ad that made our own staff members who smoked very uncomfortable. And that reaction is what prompted me to say, this is an ad we need to produce. We have been edgy, we have been provocative.
Gentlemen, the tobacco industry has a very serious multi-billion-dollar problem. We need more cigarette smokers, pure and simple. Every day, 2,000 Americans stop smoking, and another 1,100 also quit. Actually, technically, they die. That means that this business needs 3,000 fresh new volunteers every day. So forget about all that heart disease, cancer, emphysema, stroke stuff. We're not in this business for our health.
We have put forward messages that had people talking and changed the way people think about tobacco.
Please consider yourself to be under oath.
Yes or no? Do you believe nicotine is not addictive?
I believe nicotine is not addictive. Cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction. There is no intoxication.
We'll take that as a no.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I too believe that nicotine is not addictive. Now the tobacco industry is trying to tell us that secondhand smoke isn't dangerous.
Not addictive. Not addictive. Not addictive.
The 50s and 60s may have been the golden age for the tobacco industry in terms of their advertising tactics and techniques, but I would submit today is the golden age for Californians in terms of their ability to live in what is effectively a smoke-free society and to be able to breathe clean air where they work, where they go to school, generally where they play, and do what they do. So I think we're living in the golden age now, and it's the product of 20 years of hard work combating pro-tobacco influences. There was some survey done of the most iconic figures of the 20th century, and the Marlboro Man was the single most iconic figure identified. That says a lot about the power and the reach of tobacco advertising. The California Department of Health concluded, maybe there's an opportunity to turn that around and use that iconic figure to communicate messages that counter the tobacco industry's messaging that smoking is somehow healthy and attractive and appropriate. So we developed a series of print advertisements that use an image of a cowboy to really convey the truth about smoking, which is if you smoke, there's a very good chance you will get sick and you could die. So this notion of Bob, I have emphysema, calling out that the Marlboro Man or that type of figure is not invulnerable to the health consequences of a deadly and addictive product was very powerful. One of the ads that really draws attention to how the tobacco industry tries to manipulate consumers is an ad called Icons. And Icons shows a number of different very glamorous images that the tobacco industry for generations would use to depict how attractive and sexy tobacco use is. But the ad ends with the truth and with facts. It shows a very, very ill man in a wheelchair who closes the ad by saying
that you can end up looking like this.
One of the principal tenets of our media effort has been industry accountability. We think it's critical that Californians be educated about the manipulative marketing efforts of the tobacco industry and how those manipulative marketing efforts are used to draw people into tobacco use. California's anti-tobacco effort reflects that one message does not communicate with all, if you will. Given the diversity of California geographically, ethnically, linguistically, our efforts both in the community as well as through statewide media have been reflective of those cultural and linguistic differences. So we have developed in partnership with media organizations that bring particular expertise and competence to different populations, media campaign efforts that focus specifically on the African American community, the Spanish-speaking community, the Asian American community, grounded in research, grounded in science, grounded in culture and norms in those communities that affect how people think about tobacco and the extent to which they do smoke.
In the 1960s, a very clever ploy was used to fight tobacco ads on television. In the Eisenhower period before that, there had been a recognition that political parties should each have an equal right to access to the news media or to the airwaves, and so they invented what was called the Fairness Doctrine.
There wasn't an official rule, but the de facto rule was for every 3 pro-smoking ads, there was 1 anti-smoking ad.
This was then applied to cigarette advertising in the 60s very effectively because the anti-tobacco people said, well, look, if there's so many minutes of tobacco ads on TV, shouldn't there also be some public health ads as well to balance that in fairness? And so as a result, the tobacco industry voluntarily took their ads off television, and it ended up being good for them.
It's easier to sell the truth than to sell a lie. So you don't need as much anti-smoking. You don't have to match the pro-smoking advertising 1 for 1. You just need to be up there enough that it's in people's consciousness.
California's anti-tobacco effort has been very entrepreneurial and very creative. We have, for example, sponsored what we call Be a Real Hero contest that solicited PSAs, public service announcements, from people all over California. We partnered, for example, with the 6 major movie studios who agreed to place California's anti-tobacco ads on movies that depict smoking that are seen by G, PG, and PG-13 audiences. We are proud of the evidence of our success, and that is there are dramatically fewer smokers in California. We are saving billions of dollars, and most importantly, we're saving lives.
The advertising practices in America have been somewhat constrained by regulation, but nevertheless, there's still huge advertising budgets.
They were able to hire the best talent in terms of movie actors, senators. They were able to pay scientists. And so they're really able to buy a talent in a way that no other industry was able to do.
But make no mistake, the tobacco industry is continuing to invest significant amount of money in advertising and marketing for their products. And while California is fortunate to have resources to get the messages out, it still pales in significance relative to the tobacco industry.
Here is a message about the cigarette controversy from the Tobacco Institute. Guesswork and controversy as they apply to smoking and health are no substitute for the facts. Years of research financed by the tobacco industry and other sources have failed to provide clinical or experimental proof that cigarette smoking causes human disease. Statistics may show association, but they do not show cause and effect. What's needed is more research to learn the full facts about smoking and health.